In addition to that, I also have my own business, which I'm contracted to represent UK Export Finance in West Africa, which is helping foreign companies access finance where they wish to use UK products and services. And a lot of that finance support is in the infrastructure space. So I get to see quite a broad spectrum of projects across the region in the infrastructure space, and see how different systems, how different countries approach their infrastructure development plan. For this particular presentation, I'm not going to kill you by PowerPoints. Basically, 4 key sectors in the presentation today. That's just to take you on a journey to explain the Ghana Infrastructure Plan 2018 to 2047 that's been talked about much, but not many people have seen the documentation. There is an executive summary of the infrastructure plan on the NDPC website. And at the end of this presentation, there's a link on this presentation, which will be shared with everybody and available on the UK GCC website. So you can download it and look at it at your leisure. But as far as I go through the Ghana Infrastructure Plan today, I'll just go briefly an overview on the 4 key areas. We'll then go into these 6 sectors that have been highlighted within the plan, and then go in a little bit more detail on each sector, and then at the end we'll talk about the financing approaches that have been articulated in the documents, and then at the end we'll have a Q&A session. So with to the first section, in terms of the overview of the infrastructure plan, Ghana's vision is to become a higher middle income country by 2057, with a GDP per capita figure of $60,000. Today it's currently at $1,590. So that's a tremendous increase from where we see today over the next 37 years. And in order to achieve that, there needs to be huge investments into the infrastructure and the fixed capital of the country. Now, in 2015, the gross fixed capital formation in Ghana was 25% of GDP. Benchmark for most lower middle income countries is 30%. Ghana is already behind the figures in that respect, and its aspiration by 2057 is to achieve a 40% gross fixed capital formation to GDP. So lots to be done, and what does that translate in terms of money? The figures suggested in the Ghana Infrastructure Plan is saying that by 2047, because they're aiming to deliver the infrastructure platform 10 years earlier, is $1.1 trillion. So huge amount of investment over this period, and I will go into the details of where that money is located. But $2.3 billion per annum, to achieve that. The focus is to create an environment that encourages long-term predictable relationship with investors. So they're talking about partnering more deeply with the private sector in the delivery of this. And the highest priority within these various sectors is the energy, as energy is seen as the base of any industrialization of a nation, alongside affordable housing. And as you can see from that slide, affordable housing, or housing and social infrastructure, is budgeted $900 billion out of the $1.1 trillion. So there's an inordinate amount of focus on the housing side, and I think one has to question whether that is the right bias in terms of this plan, but we'll see in due course. In terms of the infrastructure plan itself, there are 6 key sectors that they look at. One is the ICT, in Information Communications and Technology, and they will be looking at a lot of the investment in that sector in the private sector. Transportation, total investment of $331 billion. with the road network being expanded by 3.5 times to 253,000 kilometers. So, there's quite a lot of road building, and we've heard this year the government articulate that it is the year of the roads. Well, I think the next 3 decades will be the decades of roads with that aggressive road construction program. In addition to roads, they're looking at further expansion of the airports to the regions and additional investments to expand the Tema and Takoradi ports, with an increased emphasis on the inland ports on the Baltic Lake. But they're also looking at suburban transport systems to improve the movement of people as urbanization increases in Ghana. As the urbanization takes place, obviously water and drainage will be increasingly important to ensure that clean, affordable and sustainable water is delivered to the population, a population that is expected to grow to 47 million people by 2045. And so, one of the things that's worth noting that's about 40% of Ghana's water requirements actually originate from outside the country. So bilateral relationships in terms of water security for the country are very important. Increased focus on the protection of water resources. $1 invested into supporting and maintaining existing water bodies saves about $70 of investment in capex on new water generation. Waste management, the fourth sector, looking at both liquid and solid waste. Again, significant investments required in that to increase the access to solid waste collection services to the population. And liquid waste in terms will be focused primarily in the urban areas in terms of sewage treatment. Housing, in this period, they're talking about a need for developing 8.4 million houses to increase the housing stock. And as part of this strategy for that sector, they're looking at local alternatives to the inputs in the housing sector to reduce the reliance on importing construction materials. And then finally, energy. Whilst we've heard a lot over the recent years about the over generation capacity in the power sector, the forecasts are suggesting that there is still considerable needs to invest into additional generating capacity. And an area that they will be focusing on is increasing the energy mix into the renewable energy sector, with about 15% of the energy supply coming from that sector in coming years. On the road side, the demand for vehicles on the road is going to be driven by increased numbers of vehicles. The expectation is that we'll jump from just under 2 million vehicles on the road today to over 14 million by 2057. So there'll be significant investments into trunk roads and also the feeder roads as a consequence. There's also a plan to the Abidjan to Lagos coastal road is expected to be upgraded to a motorway from that which is currently being developed. And then there will be 4-lane high-speed road access to Burkina from Takoradi and Accra through Kumasi, and in addition to the eastern and western corridors on either side of the country. In total, there's about 270 projects in the road sector over the course of this particular plan. Vision of the railway investments has been well articulated. Interesting to see that the current network has 947 kilometers. A lot of it is not serviceable, but they're looking to expand that to 4,000 kilometers. But also within the current holding of the railway company, they have over 2,600 buildings, most of which are residential and dilapidated. And you could see the potential of working with the railway company to refurbish those buildings to add to the houses. The phasing of the development of the railways is done over 3 phases. First phase is the rehabilitation of some of the existing lines in the western region to connect Kumasi, and then further additional phases connect through to Burkina Faso and on the eastern side of the country to connect to mineral resources of the country. On the maritime side, there are 2 parts to that. There's the sea ports, and you can see a significant investment in the marine ports. Some of that has already been done with the MPS investments, with 1.5 billion already committed to that. But on the inland ports, there's still significant investments on the Volta Lake, one at Akosombo and Bupe, but there are also additional ports on the Volta Lake, giving you about 20 different smaller ferry sites on the Volta Lake there. And then on the aviation side, the government's vision is to position Ghana as the preferred aviation hub in West Africa, continuing with the narrative of Ghana as the gateway to West Africa. Growth of passenger traffic is expected to be 7% per annum. There are 4 sections within the energy sector. Renewable energy, they're planning $13 billion of investment in the renewable energy sector during the life of this plan. The largest element of that is in the wind power, and we've seen a number of plans in recent years for wind farms to be developed. On the power transmission side, there's additional investment to be done on the power transmission to create a much more stable transmission network and to reduce the transmission losses from currently at 4%. And again, the focus is on putting in technology solutions to reduce the losses on the system. On the graph there on the screen, you can see the dark blue on the left side of the vertical line. That's showing depopulation from the rural areas in the period between 2015 and 2035. And you can see the orange part of the graph there is showing the increase in the urban population between 2015 and 2035. So clearly there's going to be huge amounts of urbanization across the country in this space, and a general depopulation of the rural areas. There's a few notable exceptions in terms of additional rural populations, the Sekondi Takoradi area, and also in the Wa area as well. In terms of the delivery of the new houses, nearly 9 million, 50% of those are expected to be built for the middle income brackets, with 35% only in the low income brackets. Now, in addition to developing the housing, there's obviously requirements for additional social services such as police stations, hospitals, schools, and within the plan they're identifying a further $10.7 billion required to deliver that, with about 14 new regional hospitals to be built during the life term of this particular infrastructure plan. Moving on to the ICT section, internet penetration rates in 2013 was 28%. The plan is to increase that to 100% by 2047. Fairly aggressive plans and aspirations to achieve that. Part of that will be delivered through the creation of ICT facilities through each region, including parks, incubators, and digital data centers, but also the installation of ICT internet access points at all public areas such as bus terminals and the like. Within the major cities, there are plans to put smart city innovations to be deployed in major cities. And the plan also articulates the building of a new smart city, which is suggested also to be the new capital for the country. There's very little detail in the infrastructure plan to identify where or how much money is allocated in the construction of that new city. So I'm afraid I can't offer more detail on that at the moment. Another important part of the government's plan around the ICT space is also to deliver the e-Transform Ghana project, where more and more government services will be delivered through digital platforms. But the majority of the investments in this space is anticipated to be delivered through PPPs from the private sector. Waste management sector highlights. Basically, again, significant investments in this space, particularly in new landfill sites around the country and the provision of liquid waste in the urban areas. Again, particularly important with the increase in the urbanization that we see from the housing slides. But in terms of landfill, they're expecting to see 32 million tonnes of municipal solid waste that will be generated per annum. And that's up from the current levels of 9 million tonnes. So significant needs to provide landfill, and recycling will become increasingly important, and to be able to extract value from the recycling of waste during the term of this plan. So in terms of that landfill, they're suggesting that about 9 square kilometres of land area will be required for the landfilling, and 15% of that would be treated as residue for landfilling. Again, local entrepreneurship, public-private partnerships also in that space, as we're seeing some existing corporations in Ghana already providing those services. Water drainage, flood control, and irrigation sector highlights significant investments into the irrigation side. And so you can see 3 key areas that, where they anticipate additional investments in irrigation: the northern sector, Greater Accra, and the Upper East. And this is to put about 800,000 hectares of land under irrigation systems, which forms about 55% of the irrigable land available in the country. Again, focusing on PPPs in this space. Drainage and flood control. With the increased urbanization, there will be increased risks around flooding within the cities. And so land use planning will be enforced, or hopefully will be enforced more rigorously. In the eastern side of Ghana, on the coastal regions around Adar and Kessa, coastal protection is still a concern, and they have plans for about 120 kilometers of coastal protection to be done there, costing around $360 million. And then finally, water. There's over let's see, nearly 400 projects in the water supply space, both in terms of new peri-water urban supply systems and upgrading of some of the existing urban water supply systems. The per capita demand for water will increase from today's levels about 75 litres to 300 litres. So society is going to be increasing ever increasing amounts of water per person by 2047. Some of that is being driven by the irrigation water demand. Some of that is being driven by the industrialization agenda as well. But it's also important to note that with this increased demand on water, the governments are giving lower priority to desalination options because of the high cost associated with that. So they'll be looking at better resource management, water security from the water originating sources from outside the country, and looking at other new water bodies. And then financing, just to give you an oversight of where the government sees the uses of the investment in the infrastructure, but also where they see potentially the sources of financing coming from. And there's quite an interesting mix there, where $1.1 trillion is required for the investment, and yet they anticipate over $4 trillion being available from various sources, either from government revenues, from the domestic private sector, and from foreign direct investments. Now, within the document, they suggest that Ghana could perhaps fund this infrastructure plan themselves without much need for foreign investments. Whilst that's a welcome sort of vision, but I think the reality, given past performance, suggests that we still need a level of foreign investment into these spaces to ensure that these programs are delivered. And so, as a chamber, we should be working with the government to ensure that the right public-private partnership frameworks are in place that provide a predictable and reliable regulatory environment for not just Ghanaian companies to invest, but also for UK companies to invest in this space. Now, with this infrastructure plan, clearly one was need to start talking about the capacity building in the construction sector. It's quite interesting to note that Ghana's architects per person in 2017, well, there were 839 registered architects in Ghana in 2017, which relates to about 33,000 people per architect. By comparison, in the UK, we have 1,800 architects per people. So we're fairly light in terms of our capacity of technical services, certainly in the architectural and the civil engineering side. So there's a need to build up capacity in terms of numbers of the consultancy sector to respond to this infrastructure plan, but also the construction industry needs to build its capacity to respond to this issue as well. and some of the issues that have been identified by construction companies, and perhaps we can discuss this further in the Q&A session, is payment delays from clients, the awarding of projects based on political affiliations. There's been some comments whether Ghanaian companies have the capacity to compete with international companies, bribery and corruption, the low use of technology in the construction industry, the poor preparation of projects, which then results in claims and budget overruns, and the challenges that companies face with access to credits to support the working capital requirements in delivering these projects. But I think as a group, as members here, I would welcome you to share your thoughts and ideas about those challenges and what you would like for the chamber to do by way of advocacy in this space. I said it wasn't going to be death by PowerPoint. That's the last slide I'm talking to today. So, Ajoba, back to you.
Thank you very much, Steve. I'm sure there are people who have questions, but I don't see any hands raised. If you have any question, any comments, could you please raise your hand by clicking on the raise your hand icon when you select chat? Or you can use the chat function and send an instant message. Hang on, I think I have somebody here. Eric Ashite.
Correct.
You have a question?
Good morning. Yes, and good morning, Stephen. Thank you very much. That's very detailed work. I just wanted to ask if the presentation will be made available to us.
Yes, it will be on available. A recording of this webinar will also be available on our website afterwards.
Very well, thank you. And also, I also note that these are very big sums. These are billions of dollars we're talking about, and apologies, I died about 2 minutes late. So how does the government intend to finance these projects?
So I'll just take you back to the last slide that shows where they see the sources of funding coming from. You can see in the top part gains from efficiencies, 154 billion. And in terms of the GET Fund, Road Funds, Ghana Infrastructure Fund, and Property Tax, they're alone, they're seeing, what is that, 350, nearly $500 billion coming from that during the life of this infrastructure plan. There are additional monies that are expected through reducing of illicit flows and corruption. And then you see FDI that's anticipated to be able to bring $2.7 trillion to support the infrastructure investments.
Alice.
Hello.
Yes, Alice.
Yes. One question, Steve. The numbers of the 8.4 million homes anticipated. Do you know the proportion that would be allocated to student housing? Has there been a study in that regard?
So I haven't seen the granularity about student housing. I can check and get back to you after this call today.
Okay. Yeah. And one last thing, the number of architects that, I mean, it's quite scary, 839 architects. I guess those are the officially registered ones, but I think we also need to take into account the informal sector. Those ways we can call them architects, but they are providing a service to lots of people who tend to use technicians or your mason, etc. And somehow I think that should be also reflected somewhere, because that happens, you know, and that's I think that's probably the larger percentage of the construction that goes on here. Whether they probably don't comply with building regs and the statutory requirements, but it does happen. So I think somehow they need to be shoehorned in and recognized.
Yeah, I think the challenge that when they wrote this infrastructure plan is, how do you actually capture the real numbers in the informal sector, given there's no true visibility? I think this also talks to the point of the need for enforcement of regulations to make sure that the properly qualified people are doing the right job. Otherwise, we end up with instances and terrible accidents that we've seen in a number of years, with buildings collapsing during the course of construction and killing people.
Thank you, Alice.
Hi, this is Aziza Atta from Egality Law. Thank you very much for the very insightful presentation. The question I have is with regards to the rapid urbanization that you spoke about, what kind of investment opportunities do you think there will be for international investors through this rapid urbanization?
So in terms of investments, I think the opportunities are around sustainable buildings, both in terms of the commercial building space, but also the residential space. There's also the public service buildings, and seeing where the opportunities are to provide the right retail infrastructure and urban regeneration of areas. We can see that parts of Accra at the moment, for example, are dying as developments are moving out to East Legon. And there really are opportunities to regenerate some of those older parts of Accra to bring the traffic and the activity back into those spaces.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Aziza. Fred?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Fred, we can hear you.
Perfect. Okay. Steve, hi. Well, this is Fred Kojuelis, country lead for Agility. Just a quick question. There's a lot of talk about industrialization and the talking points from this government, and also some initiative about industrial parks, special economic zones from the Ministry of Trade in particular. I didn't see any of this captured. Is there any direct interventions on that part in terms of building industrial parks, special economic zones in the report? Just want to have your thoughts.
Yeah, so there is some talk, and within the housing sector highlights the way that they've structured the nodes of construction are around the areas of economic activity related to the mineral or the agricultural wealth of the country. And so you can see on the slide that's on the screen at the moment, they talk about redevelopment of the informal industrial enclaves as well. And you've also got in the IT sector the talk about creating the ICT parks across the different regions. So it is in there as part of the industrialization program, focused on the economic activities around the natural resources of the country.
On the cities. Okay, understood. Okay, thanks a lot.
Robin?
Yeah, hi, Ajoba. This is Robin McCone from Ernst & Young EY. Possibly an overly specific and technical question, but I'm sure Steve will be able to answer. I understand that there's a real estate investment trust regime being planned, a draft paper at the moment in Ghana. Do you think that that's something which the Chamber would want to look at how we could develop it a little bit more to attract investment in the real estate sector?
So Robin, thanks for raising that. The Securities and Exchange Commission actually have released the Real Estate Investment Trust Guidelines last year, and that document is available on their website. The government, as part of their focus on supporting the affordable housing space, is looking to establish this year the first real estate investment trust to help leverage in more additional private sector financing. One of the challenges at the moment with the regulations around the SEC is the maximum amount that funds can invest into asset classes. So currently, based on the amount of pension fund money that's available in Ghana, there's probably only about $200 million that could be mobilized from the pensions sector into the real estate investment trust asset class. But certainly it's something that they are working on, and the government is actively pushing forward at the moment. The real game changer in the housing market will be the attraction of long-term patient capital to support the mortgage financing space.
Thanks, Steve.
Leslie, I see you have a question as to whether there's any funding or infrastructure for private food processing companies. I think that comes back to the industrial parks and the infrastructure around that. There's no specific funding for food processing companies per se within this infrastructure plan. But if you are exporting, I would encourage you to reach out to the Ghana Export-Import Bank that is actively supporting agri-processing companies by way of exports.
Eric has another question.
Yeah, so this is Eric from APSA. I think following up from the last question around the real estate investment trust, I think that's something that was on the shelves for several years. And being a banker, I've seen a number of deals which have not progressed because of the lack of legislation around the rate. Now, another legislation I've also been following for several years now, at least 15 years now, is the municipal bond. Because as the government looks to develop infrastructure, municipal bond is a good way for government to raise funding, long-term, I mean, the municipalities to raise long-term funding to provide infrastructure, which will then be paid over a period of time. I can't see the screen around the sources and uses. I'm not sure if that is captured there, but what is it? And I remember at one time I had to represent my managing director at a meeting with the Minister of Finance, and I raised that question around what the government is doing around that municipal bond legislation, which will at least Accra, Kumasi, Tema, where we have all these industries and some of these nice real estate paying some money, against which there can be structures to raise long-term funding to provide infrastructure, which then becomes paid over the period of time. Do you have any ideas around this municipal bonding?
So Eric, you raised a very interesting question, and you know, the framework for PPPs and municipal funding came out a couple of years ago, and the level of direct agreements they could enter into for PPPs was relatively small. I think 500,000 CDs was the limit, which really doesn't allow a municipality to do anything material. But if I look at the way state governments in Nigeria operates, you know, they have funding allocation from federal governments, and they have limitations on financing they can take from that. But they also have the ability to raise funds through internally generated revenue. And there are clear restrictions on how much they can use of their IGFs to service debt. I haven't seen anything in Ghana that articulates that limitations on municipalities in being able to access debt funding. I think this is probably an interesting area for the Chamber to take up and move forward with, to see if we can support municipalities to raise money for their infrastructure needs, particularly with the urbanisation. Joe, could I ask if we could put that onto the agenda for the Chamber to look at?
Any further questions? Any contributions? Okay, so Steve, I think we'll probably have to end it here. However, we have recorded this webinar. The slides will also be available to all participants. You can email myself or Steve if you think of any other questions, or if you require any further clarification after we end this webinar. Steve, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I'd just like to thank everybody for joining us today. It's interesting times that we all live in at the moment. It's good to be able to reach out to so many people through mediums like this. And I'm sure in the coming weeks and months, working patterns will change to be more remote working. For those who haven't seen it, the Chamber released the Business Impact Survey results on the coronavirus in Ghana. It's available on the website. So again, please feel free to look at that and come back to the Chamber with any comments that you may have.
Eric, is your hand up?
Yes.
Is it from before?
Yes, it is actually. You know, it is actually. So just wanted to say that, as I understand, Steve is perhaps advising the Chamber to take up this issue of the municipal bonds. I'm very happy to serve on any such committee or any any group we put together to champion this cause is passionate to me. I think that it's a good source for the country to raise long-term funding, which gets paid over a period of time, and it lessens the burden on the central government for development activities. So if we decide to set up any committee, I'm happy to commit myself to work on that committee.
Thank you very much for volunteering, Eric. We'll take you up on that. Thank you, everyone. When we schedule our next webinar, we'll let you know. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.